Hello, friends. I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope it's fantastic. Everything here is great. Yesterday, we talked about Batman and James Bond and whatever, and I mentioned that my Batman was comic book Batman and that the movie Batman's never loved the comics. And so then Chris asked what my favorite comics were. And I searched for some props, but I don't have any anymore. I gave my comic collection away recently, which was like my second or third iteration of a comic collection. And I can definitively say Batman was always my favorite comic book character. But my second favorite would have been probably Green Arrow. And then maybe like when I was a child, when I was younger, it was mostly just those two, honestly. So I grew up poor. Like, we weren't poor, but my parents were very frugal and very thoughtful with their money. It was basically a single income household for most of my life. When my mom did work, it was minimum wage jobs. My dad was a school teacher, so we weren't rolling in anything. So personally, me, Chevee, little Chevee, didn't have money for stuff. Like, I couldn't go buy, books. I've talked before about how the smell of paperback books reminds me of sitting in Walden Books and reading while we were at the mall. Like, I would read a few chapters of a book, and then every time we went back, I would read. Like, that's how I got to read as a kid, because there was no money for books. So most of the stuff that I was reading as a smaller child, pre teenage years, would have been comics at Walden's or comics at the drugstore. And even at that time, they were mostly like those knockoff reprints. Like, they weren't the newest issues of comic books. So I was getting very like disconnected, disjointed versions of stories because I was getting one issue, right, of whatever. And so I loved Batman. It was my absolute favorite. And then, like, in middle school, we didn't really have middle school. We had, I forget what it was called before junior high. I met a friend, and then junior high we stayed friends, and he was into comic books, but he had money. And so he had comic books. And so his favorites were like X-Men and X-Factor and Punisher and stuff I'd never heard of. So for a while there, I kind of was like, yeah, I'm into X-Men too, and I really liked Gambit, and I found Cyclops to be an interesting character, and Wolverine was a huge favorite. But in reality, that was just, I was trying to fit in. It wasn't really my thing. So the first time I really got to establish a collection of comic books was probably my 8th grade year, maybe even into my freshman year of high school. I was a paperboy, and so I had money for the first time, like, that I could spend on whatever I wanted to spend it on. And not too far from my high school was a comic book shop, like 3 floor blocks, maybe at most, was a comic book shop. And so I had a subscription there of maybe 10 or 12 titles a month. So I was spending $30 a month or something like that on comic books. And it was all Batman related titles. So it would be Batman, Detective Comics, Robin, Catwoman, like whatever was, I don't even remember what they all were. I had Green Arrow, Hawkman. I really didn't venture much outside of that. And the reason is, I think I've said this before on the show at some point in the past, I was never really into superheroes. That, like, the idea of superhero was something I couldn't be, right? But a Batman or a Green Arrow, that's just training, money, and time. Like, I could achieve those things in my young child, like, mind, or my adolescent mind. Those were my heroes. Superheroes were just fantasy. Like, that's just not my. I wasn't interested in it. I was like, yeah, that's cool and all, but I can't be Cyclops. That's not a thing that's ever, that's not a thing. But I could be the Green Arrow if I spent enough time practicing. Why not? And so I always connected more with the realism of the, like, kind of grittier. Um, yeah. And in the 90s, the run of Green Arrow, I forget who took it over. There was somebody who took it. He got kind of gritty in the 90s, and I really liked it. It was kind of, for some reason in DC, I don't think Marvel's ever done this, but DC kind of resets every decade or so, something, 10 years. They'll have some sort of global catastrophe that resets all the heroes and then they go again. And it's basically because they just kind of let writers go off and do whatever the hell they want. There's no like overarching plan, and then the timelines and then all the storylines get so confusing and so messed up and so contradictory, they just have a crisis and reset it. And in the 90s, it was called Crisis. It was called A Crisis in Time, and it was spanned to the entire DC universe. Everybody got involved, got reset. Characters disappeared, characters came back, new characters emerged, whatever. And so after Crisis in Time, Green Arrow got kind of retold to a grittier, more aggressive character, and I liked that a lot. I've always liked the gritty realism stuff. I think that you could consider. I do have a couple of Thundercats comics, but those weren't really I don't know if they had Thundercats comic books. They had Thundercats books, like at the Scholastic Book Fair, a little like 6x6. I have a few of those. I still have those in my like toddler's thing. That was something, I loved Thundercats. But I went through high school, read a lot of comics. When I got to the military, I didn't so much. I think I just kind of stopped, and I didn't even collect graphic novels or anything like that. And then DC reset again, like in the early 2010s. Wow, was that? I think that sounds right. In the 2010s, there was another crisis or whatever they called it. I don't remember what they called it. They reset, and so I got back into DC again. And I was picking up Batman, Green Arrow. I picked up Swamp Thing because it was very, very good. Hawkman. And then I picked up a bunch of fringe titles. So at that time, I got into a lot of not necessarily indie. At this point, Image is no longer an indie publisher, but when I was a kid, they were. I got into a lot of indie-er stuff. Things like Unwritten, Lock and Key, which is obviously not indie at this point, but it was at first. Man, I can't remember the names of some of the books. I had a pretty good collection of esoteric indie stuff. All Peter Panzerfaust, I love that series, and I gave all that stuff away. Just at the start of the pandemic, I was clearing. Like, I have too much stuff in my house. I hadn't looked at my comics in a decade. Let's flush them. And so I gave them all away. And I don't know that I own anything. I have a couple of Thorgal comics because Portal's got a game about Thorgal, so I read up on it a little bit. I maybe have a few graphic novels that were important to me. I don't know for sure if I do or not. Oh, I definitely have Bone. Bone is one of my favorite ever. And I have the Bone Omnibus collection. I think I have some Walking Dead stuff, hardback Walking Dead collections, but I don't currently read any comics. I mean, I have a bunch of manga, but I haven't been reading it in a couple of years. So yeah, what about you? What are your guys' favorites? Did you have favorites? Do you still have favorites? Do you still read? I haven't picked up a comic book in a very long time, but maybe next time DC resets, I'll look into it again. I don't know. I feel like I'm enjoying novels right now, and I don't have a whole lot of time in my life for other things right now. There's a lot going on, and so starting another comic addiction is probably not in the cards. I think that if I were to do it again, I would just pick up trade paperbacks when they come out, or graphic novels when they come out. Like, collected issues, and just go that way. If I ever did it again. Yeah, there you go. It's Friday. What do you got going on this weekend? I think we are going to visit with my oldest. We're going to go up. There's a mall up near her college that has a really cool arcade, and the youngest has been wanting to go see that. So I think we're going to go up and have dinner, and go to the arcade and hang out. And my youngest is in DC. I had to drop her off at the school this morning at 3:15 a.m. and I have to pick her up tomorrow morning at 2 a.m. Yeah. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you again to Monday. To Monday? Today's word you should know sounds smart is variegated. It is an adjective meaning that which changes color or contains different hues of the same color. A lawn covered in variegated fallen leaves is a sign that autumn is finally here. Variegated. V-A-R-I-E-G-A-T-E-D. I didn't know that necessarily had to do with color. I thought like if you had a pattern that changes, that's also variegation. Is that true?